Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui. It is Gemini season. We have made it. This is the part of the year where the energy really starts picking up. We're coming out of the weight of Taurus season and we're moving into Gemini season, which is a lot lighter, a lot more effervescent. Gemini season 2025 is a lot. And I have said over and over when I've talked about 2025 that we have a lot coming towards us. There's a lot happening in the world. It's difficult to keep up with all of it. And it's just kind of a wild year. There's no better way to say it. Let's look at an overview of this Gemini season and some of the things that are happening that are contributing to this feeling that we have a lot going on. We've had a lot going on, and it's just kind of escalating over the course of the next few weeks. Right off the bat, Gemini season, we have the Sun in Gemini trining Pluto in Aquarius. This is heavier energy. It's a little bit more intense. So if you're watching this right at the start of Gemini season and you're like, this doesn't feel very bubbly to me, that's okay. It is not going to feel that way right away. It might feel like a little bit of a weight of the earthy energy of Taurus season is falling away, but it's going to take a moment to kind of pick up steam. One of the big things that's happening this Gemini season is Saturn is changing signs, and this is something that happens only every couple of years. So it's not an everyday transit. It's happening on Saturday, May 24th. So this is going to be a bit of a direction change for us. And we only have Saturn in Aries for a few months until September 1st, and then it'll retrograde back into Pisces, and then we will get it in Aries again in 2026. So we're kind of getting a taste test this year of what this energy is going to be like going forward. We're starting a new cycle. Saturn moving into Aries is a kind of a new chapter because Aries is the first sign in the zodiac. So whenever a planet moves into Aries, it's kind of a big deal because we're wrapping up a lot of things from that previous Saturn cycle, which is an almost 30-year cycle. So that is a lot to wrap up. And one of the interesting things about Saturn moving into Aries is that we also have Neptune in the early degrees of Aries. So that is part of the reason why this energy is going to feel kind of wild, because typically we don't have these two planets in this spot in the zodiac. And with everything else that we have going on in the astrology, it should make for some very wild situations, especially with global events. And if you want to hear more about my predictions for world events for Saturn and Aries, I dropped an episode for my patrons on that last week. It's up. You can go listen to it. I'll put that link below. So after Saturn moves into Aries, we kind of go through this big transition. We get a couple of days to sort of settle into that Saturn and Aries energy. But right off the bat, we're moving towards that new moon in Gemini. The weekend of the 24th has some intensity to it. So that might be something to consider as you make your plans. Maybe don't overextend yourself and just see how you're feeling with these changes and with the build up to the new moon, because this is usually a time where big emotions are coming up and things are coming to the surface so that we can address them with the new moon energy. So it's kind of a lot. Coming out of that Gemini new moon on the 26th, that is the time that we want to set intentions. We want to really utilize the Gemini energy very consciously, because that is how we kind of plant seeds using Gemini energy. And so 6 months from now, we will probably start to see a lot of those intentions starting to bear fruit, because that's how the energy works. So it's a 6-month cycle. This is the beginning of the Gemini 6-month cycle. And so anything that you want to get out of this Gemini season, this new moon is the perfect time to make those intentions known to the universe, because that's how we kind of get the most out of the energy. Coming out of that Gemini new moon energy, which is always a bit of a process in and of itself, when we have these big lunations, these big moments with the moon, the energy can feel like a lot because the moon has a lot to do with our emotional state. So things get stirred up. So as we're coming out of that new moon energy, we'll have Mercury and the sun moving closer together in the sky. This is called a cazimi. And I think people make a lot of kazimis in popular astrology. For me, I kind of look at it as a time where our mental faculties are more activated, right? So if you're an overthinker, if you are somebody that has a lot of mental stimulation already, this might be a time where you want to just kind of pay attention and not overstimulate yourself if you can avoid it. Take your time. But at the same time, if you are a writer, if you're a thinker of some kind, this energy can be very inspiring. This can be times where you can get a lot of work done. Given that this Kanzimi is happening in the sign of Gemini, our mental faculties are already going to be really stimulated, right? So we just want to be careful of not overburdening ourselves, not giving our minds more than we can chew on. At the same time, this can be a really good time to think through some things. Maybe if you're pitching an idea or you're working on a project that involves thinking or writing, this can be a good time to work on those things. It may also be a time where you're feeling more social, more communicative. So pay attention to how this Kazimi makes you feel. It's going to depend, of course, on your own personal astrology chart. So it's not going to be a one size fits all thing, but there are some really good uses of this Kazimi energy if you're open to it. And then after that Kazimi, we move towards June 2nd, which is one of the days that I have marked for this Gemini season as a more intense day because we have the moon squaring off with the sun. And those are days where it tends to be a little bit more emotional. You might find that you run up against some walls in your life, and you might have to be a little bit more creative with the solutions to those problems. So, June 2nd is a day that I would just pay attention. I would be aware that if you're dealing with challenges, that might not be the day you want to like schedule the difficult thing if you can avoid it. But if you do end up having to do something that is more challenging or does have a little bit more tension to it, you don't want to look at that as a punishment or something bad, right? If it's what has to happen on that particular day, it can also be a day where you surprise yourself with your creativity or you approach things in a way that you might not normally. So, if you stay open to even challenging energy, there are benefits that can come from that. As that tension kind of fades out, on June 5th, we have a day that looks a lot lighter in certain ways. That doesn't mean that every single person's going to have a great day. That's not really how astrology works, unfortunately. But this is a day where the moon is going to be trining the sun, and we also have Venus moving into Taurus. So, this is a day that can be great for reconnecting with people that you're close to. This is a day where you might feel a little bit more creative or communicative or social. So, plan accordingly. Make use of June 5th if that sounds interesting to you. And really hold on to that energy if you can help it, because a few days later on June 8th, kind of an intense day. We have the moon in Scorpio opposing Uranus. So there is a certain amount of intensity to that energy, whether we like it or not. It's just going to be kind of in the air. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to have an intense day or that you're going to have a bad day, but it's just a day to kind of be aware of. It's a little stickier than we might like, right? So, not only do we have the moon in Scorpio opposing Uranus, but we also have Jupiter at 29 degrees of Gemini, about to move into Cancer. And then we have Mercury moving into Cancer that day as well. So you might be very sensitive that day, or other people might be very sensitive that day. And so you want to plan accordingly. You want to move a little bit more strategically, if you know what I mean. Because, if people are sensitive, if they're not very conscious, you might run into some issues. But there's this buildup of energy happening. And so I think that June 8th is a day that we're really going to be feeling that buildup. And then the following day, on June 9th, we have another big ingress. And an ingress is just when a planet moves into a different sign. So we have Jupiter ingressing into the sign of Cancer. Now, if you'll remember, I said we also have Saturn moving into Aries, where Neptune is already. So that means that Jupiter is going to be immediately squaring that Saturn and Neptune. This is not automatically bad, but it is an aspect that does have, again, a little more tension to it. If you're noticing a little bit of a theme with this Gemini season, there are some really intense moments over the course of this season. So, as much as we want to have a good time and play, which I think are great things to do with this Gemini energy, you want to keep in mind that there's also big stuff happening around us, and that the energy in and of itself is just kind of a lot. So we want to navigate smartly. And then after that, we've got the full moon on the 11th of June. And this is a pretty big full moon in Sagittarius, and I'll talk about that when we get closer to it. But just know that that's coming. We get one every season. We get one for Gemini season, okay? And then following that full moon, we have like almost a week of energy that just has a bit of a bite to it. Not only are full moons intense moments, generally speaking, but we have other energy in the week following this full moon where you might feel really energized and like you can get a lot done. You want to make sure that you're engaging yourself mentally and physically, especially because this energy, it has a lot of mental qualities to it. So this is energy where we're going to easily feel overstimulated, especially those of us who are prone to anxiety or just like overstimulation in general. This is a week where we want to take extra good care of ourselves. It's going to pay off in dividends. But wait, there's more. So as we experience this week of kind of building up energy where there is more of that tension, then on June 17th, we have Mars moving into Virgo. And so that is always kind of a big change. But I just want to point out that we've had Mars in Cancer and then Leo because of the retrograde. So this is going to feel a little bit more obvious to us in terms of the energy shifting out of Leo, just because we've been kind of in this space for so long. So just pay attention to how Mars moving into Virgo is making you feel. It's going to depend, of course, on where it is in your astrology. With everything else going on and how the energy's been for the past 6+ months, this Mars movement into Virgo is probably going to stand out a little bit more than a Mars ingress might otherwise. And then on June 20th, we have the solstice, which is the beginning of Cancer season. So as you can see, this is a particularly active Gemini season, and I just want people to be ready for that. Now, on a mundane level, on a world events level, there are a lot of things going to happen this Gemini season. I just want to highlight a few things that I personally am watching out for, and I think is going to contribute a lot to the vibes this Gemini season. So, first of all, I'm looking at the Supreme Court. I think this Gemini season we could see some really game changing decisions from the Supreme Court, especially in June as they finish out their session. They won't be meeting again until October. So, this is kind of the time where if they're going to drop some big decisions, they're going to drop some big decisions. And I think we should be ready for that because we may or may not like what we see. Another thing that I'm really looking at this Gemini season is Israel and Palestine. Of course, the genocide is continuing there, it is escalating. And I do think that it's going to spill out into more regional conflicts over the course of the Gemini season. This has been building up. It shouldn't be a surprise if you've been paying attention. But with this energy, there's a lot of other things happening that is making me look really intensely at this particular area. I think Israel is going to start facing more pushback from the international community and consequences as things get uglier, because they are getting uglier. And I think that we're seeing nations trying to pretend that they were against this genocide the whole time. And so accountability, I think, is going to be becoming more a part of the conversation. And it's important for us to not go easy on the countries that allowed this to happen and let them suddenly switch up, right? We have to keep the narrative real and not let them get away with this, because this has been a horrific crime against humanity and it's continuing right under the international community's nose. In fact, Israel just let in a few trucks of humanitarian aid, which people were excited about because people in Gaza are literally starving. And most of the trucks that they sent in were filled with shrouds for dead people. So they're making it very clear that their intention is to remove people, whether by death or by forcing them out of Gaza. And we really can't let that happen. So, this is a Gemini season where I'm hoping that people use their voices, take action, make connections with their neighbors, because we have to stand against things like this, or else it's going to happen more often. June 14th, something that I'm not personally looking forward to. It's Trump's birthday, and also, just coincidentally, the army is celebrating by parading in Washington, D.C. This is something that Trump has wanted for years. He wants this big military display. And oh, yes, it just so happens to be on his birthday. So, it totally doesn't have anything to do with his huge ego, right? But it's a very expensive thing to do. And they're doing it on a really short timeline. So I could see there being some mishaps, some things going wrong, which might be kind of nice for us to watch. But I think that ultimately the way that Americans and the rest of the world respond to this parade is going to be really important. And I think that the contrast between this multi-million dollar celebration and the way that the average American is struggling to afford their basic needs is going to be really obvious. And I don't think that's going to do Trump any favors. But what I think is that it's really important that how Americans and the rest of the world respond to this parade is going to tell us a lot about how things are about to develop and progress, especially with the United States. In terms of world events, this Gemini season, this parade is unfortunately one that I'm going to take a lot of cues from, because I think it's going to tell us a lot about the mood and what people are willing to do. I'm hoping that we see a lot of protest for this, but I may go look at this chart in another video in more detail. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like. Another thing that I'm looking at in terms of world events is our healthcare system and public health, especially here in the US, is under attack. It's been under attack. And I think this Gemini season, we will see more of that, unfortunately. So I want to encourage you to stay informed and plugged into what's happening to the best of your ability, because regular people like you and me are now having to do the work of public health, as people like RFK Jr. and the other Trump cronies are just like hacking away at the things that were, just barely keeping us a little bit safer. They're making it even harder. So if you care about your health and the health of your family and your loved ones, this is the time to really step up and invest in that and actually take action steps to protect your health and the health of your communities, because the government isn't doing it. All right, before we go, I want to talk about how to use the Gemini energy, because Gemini season is awesome. This is a particularly wild Gemini season, and that doesn't mean that we can't have fun, that we can't make progress, but it's important to remember that just because shit is hitting the fan in the world doesn't mean that it's going to be coming at you directly. You do want to stay informed, but there's such a thing as too much information, as Geminis know, and not enough action, right? So, not enough focus on the present moment and where you physically find yourself in any given moment would be a mistake. You want to stay as present as possible this Gemini season. And think about how much information you don't notice when you're busy thinking about everything that's happening in the world all the time, right? We can't stay present if our heads are always processing everything that's going on, which is why it's important to take breaks. Some of the things to embrace this Gemini season: mindset. Mindset is everything. And Gemini season is very mental. So if you find yourself dealing with negative thoughts or worry, things like that, this is a season to actively interrupt those thoughts and replace them with thoughts that are, not making up a totally new reality, but just changing your perspective, right? Trying on a more constructive or more positive perspective as much as possible is going to really help out this Gemini season. Another great thing to do for Gemini season is to foster connections. If you have been really busy with work, this is a time to reconnect with your friends. Reinforce those connections, because, as I've said before, as Pluto moves through Aquarius over these next 19 years, there's going to be nothing more important than our connections and our community. So making sure that you're checking in, that you're building connections, that you're touching base with the people that matter to you. You also want to touch base with people in your neighborhood, in your community, maybe people that aren't your besties, right? Or people that you know really well, because we can foster connections with anyone, really. You also want to invest more in where you are, right? So many of us don't know our neighbors. So many of us don't know our unhoused neighbors because a lot of people consider people that don't live in houses not part of the community, or they treat them like outside invaders. But Gemini energy tells us that there is information and connection to be had with just about anyone, right? You don't have to be somebody's bestie to learn from them. You don't have to be somebody's bestie to be neighbors with them. You have a shared interest just because you share a physical space in some way. And so, if you have people in your community that have been maybe a little bit more on the outside, this is a great season to change that up and look for connection where you might not have before. And this is Gemini season. So you may be surprised, somebody that you thought maybe you had nothing in common with, maybe there's actually more there than you thought. And that's one of the fun things about Gemini energy, is because it's often surprising. Another thing that you want to do this Gemini season is cultivate curiosity. Gemini is very mental energy and it benefits from following its curiosity, right? So if you have wanted to learn more about something, if you wanted to try something, this is a good time to do those things, to think about doing those things, or to just actually, go for it. This tends to be a season where curiosity is rewarded in some way. So if you've been feeling some nudges, instead of pushing those away and be like, actually, that's not very important, Gemini season is a time where the little things can be just as important and magical and lead you somewhere special as the big things, right? So give those things a chance, follow your curiosity, and just see where it leads. And on that note, another thing I like to recommend for this Gemini season, learning by trying. So if you want to learn something, maybe instead of cracking open a book, which is great, Gemini season is a great time for reading, writing, learning in any way. But instead of just going the more academic route, what if you just took it into your own hands and just gave it a shot? Understand you can experiment with a thought or a feeling or an activity without having to commit to it forever. One of the things I love most about Gemini energy is that it's mutable, which means it's not the same all of the time. So, this is a time of year to embrace your versatility. You are allowed to try on a different costume, whether it's literally or whether it's mentally. And sometimes those exercises or those moments of playful curiosity can really be these massive gifts in our life. So don't downplay just because it might feel trivial, because Gemini energy tends to not be super judgmental. If something is going to be interesting or satisfy some curiosity, that's enough. That's worth it. So be open to giving things a shot, and you'll be surprised how much you learn, even if it doesn't go exactly how you'd imagined. Lastly, for this Gemini season, I want us to really gamify things as much as possible. Like I said, Gemini is very curious, experimental energy. And a lot of life, we go to work, we have to go to the grocery store, things that are not super exciting for a lot of us, that might even be kind of boring. As much as possible, try to gamify the things in your life that may feel less interesting. You'd be surprised how much fun you can have by taking something that's usually pretty boring and making a game out of it, or making it an experiment in some way. Gemini season is the time for that. Something else to look forward to this Gemini season: every month I host the Petty Astrology Club, and we're having our Gemini season meeting this Sunday, May 25th on Zoom, and you're invited. So if you'd like to join us for that, try something new, learn more about astrology and how it applies to you personally, this is kind of the perfect place for it. This June, in celebration of Gemini season, I'm offering a big discount on transit readings for club members. These are readings where I look at your near future and we get more insight on what you can expect and how to really take advantage of the energy of the moment to make your goals a reality. I'll put all the information down below. Happy Gemini season. Don't forget to enjoy it and build community and connection and just cultivate nice thoughts for yourself. That's it for this week's episode. Tune in on Patreon for even more petty astrology.